So, hello and welcome to the latest in the series of Earn, Learn, Thrive LinkedIn Lives. And here today with me, I have Walton Burns, publishing consultant and owner of Alphabet Publishing. So, we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of self-publishing for educators, so teachers, teacher trainers, consultants, anybody who basically is interested in publishing within the ELT world. We're going to be talking about different models, what kinds of services might help you, what it costs, and of course, how likely you are to actually make any money. I think that's the one that everybody wants to know. If you're watching live, do let us know, say hi in the comments, and please do add any questions as we go, and we will do our best to answer them. So, Walton, can I ask you to start by telling us a bit about yourself and, of course, about Alphabet Publishing?
Sure. So I started out as an English language teacher, actually in the Peace Corps in the South Pacific. And then I've taught all over the world, different kinds of students. And when I returned back to the US, I just kind of started moving more and more into materials writing. And eventually started kind of just putting out my own materials on my website. And it's kind of gone from there. And now, I've done a lot of work for the large publishers, but now I'm mainly focused on self-publishing and my indie publishing company, Alphabet Publishing, which is 100% author-led projects. So the teachers come to me and say, "This is my idea. I want to publish it." And then I also provide self-publishing services for teachers that want to put something out themselves, but maybe they just want someone to edit it or format it or talk them through how do you get something up on Amazon, how do you market or sell something.
Right. You see, now I didn't realize that you had that distinction in your business. So that's useful to know, because I think there are people out there who are looking for both of those things, somebody to be a publisher and just publish it for them, but also somebody to help with all of those bits and pieces that are involved when it comes to self-publishing that normally, a publisher would do for you. Yeah, so I mean, shall we talk a bit about what the process is, if you like, when it comes to publishing?
I'm sure, do you want to talk about self-publishing or?
Well, self-publishing or publishing with you, if you know what I mean. So,
Right.
it's because I think it's slightly different when you're talking about multi-million pound businesses. But, what are some of the things that we have to think about?
Right. So in general, so if you wanted to publish through me, authors usually send me some kind of idea. Sometimes they'll send a finished manuscript. And then, and what I like to look at, and if you're self-publishing, you should be looking at this as well. What is your idea? How is it going to sell? What makes it, interesting for other teachers? What makes it sort of unique or different, and marketable? And then, if it looks like something that will be sellable, I would take a look at it, and then I would hire my editors or edit it myself. And in that process, sometimes the idea gets changed quite a bit, because I might say, or an editor might say, well, this is a really good idea, but this isn't really going to work in most classrooms. But what if we changed it like this? What if it was a photocopyable book instead of a student book? What if you included a reading or a listening? And then from there, that's obviously a conversation. Sometimes it's a difficult conversation, but it's I think a necessary conversation to make sure that the materials are actually going to work in the classroom and reach a broad audience. Even for an indie, obviously the big publishers have multi-million-dollar research and academic research and marketing teams and sales teams that we can't really compete with. But once the sort of the text is finished, then it needs to be formatted and turned into a book, and then we need a cover, all of which I like to do with a certain amount of collaboration with the author, because the authors usually also have knowledge and experience that's valuable. And then I put it out on Amazon and Ingram Spark, which are print-on-demand platforms, which if you're self-publishing or small scale publishing is great because it means you don't have to buy a bunch of books and get them printed and pay upfront for that. And my alerts are going off. um,
That's fine. It's alive. These things happen. Wait till my dog starts barking. Yeah.
So you don't have to print 1,000 books and then you have to either pay a warehouser or keep them in your garage. Print on demand means someone orders the book from a bookseller and Amazon or Ingram prints that book and ships it off to them.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think is something that, I mean, it's been around for quite a few years now, but I think a lot of people still don't really realize how much the self-publishing scene has changed as a result of that, because, it was the case that if you self-published, you had to find a publisher that would do it, often kind of called a vanity publisher, because they weren't like you, it wasn't a collaborative thing. It was like, right, you pay us and we'll print it. And then you had to have those books in your garage and literally send them out to people. And, it's not like that at all anymore. And it really is very simple in some ways. I mean, not necessarily technically, but to actually physically publish a book on Amazon. But just because it's simple to publish a book on Amazon doesn't mean that it's actually easy to get it right, which I guess is where you and your service come in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of people, I mean, it obviously depends what you're publishing, but there are a lot of people that, because you can go to kdp.com or kdpamazon.com and upload a file and boom, now it's on Amazon. You can go to your local bookstore and order it. But, there's a lot of steps that go in the way to make sure that it's going to be a quality product. There's a whole, art to book design, which I've learned a lot about in the past 7 years. Just even small things like making the text line up correctly, ensuring that, all the fonts work well with the subject matter. There's a lot of technical details that I think often get missed, and it takes a lifetime of learning to figure out.
Yeah, and you do see, I mean, perhaps a bit less so these days, but certainly 5-10 years ago, there seemed to be so many books on Amazon, ebooks I'm talking about really, where they were just riddled with, spelling mistakes and bits missing and, quite incredible how bad the quality can be at times, which obviously, is something that we want to avoid. So can we talk a bit then? One of the questions when I asked in my membership group, I said we were going to be doing this, and I asked people what questions they wanted to ask. And one of the questions that came up almost immediately was the question of costs. So we've talked about, how you can do like print on demand, but what are we talking about, do you think, in terms of costs to self-publish these days?
Yeah. So it's really hard to put a set price because it really does depend what your project is. Is it a textbook that's going to have a lot of art and color and detailed formatting, or is it a memoir, or maybe that's mostly text, or is it a graded reader, which is going to be quite short and not a lot of formatting. But in terms of budgeting for costs, I mean, you have to think about editing. And I do think that it is worth getting a professional editor, at least a copy editor or line editor. I know a lot of people say, well, my friends and my colleagues can do a lot of the editing. And that's true in terms of your idea and finding kind of typos. But a good professional editor, thinks about style, flow, organization, clarity, cohesion, even things like, did you realize that your example, in your grammar box, you have an example, you say the present perfect is used in this context, but then your exercise doesn't have a single example of that usage, which happens in the big textbooks. I think we've all we've all done that in the working for the big guys too, or seen it as teachers. So I think you want a good editor, and then you have to worry about book design, which again, if you're doing a quick ebook, you could do it yourself. There's programs that cost $100, $200 that are quite good. If you're doing a paperback or print book, you're either going to need much more expensive software or an expert. And then what are the other costs? And then the art. If you're looking for art, obviously there's free art there, and then there's paid stock photo sites, or you can hire an artist. And there's
or AI, presumably these days.
Yeah, and these days AI, but then you have to look at the copyright.
Yeah, well, indeed, that's a whole minefield that's coming up, isn't it?
And you have to value your time. When you're doing something yourself, well, what is your time worth? Am I going to sit and work with an AI and try to detail and get it right, or sift through pages and pages of stock photo sites, or am I going to hire an artist? And when you're looking at an editor, artist, or book formatter, you get what you pay for. So there are people on Fiverr.com that will do an illustration for $20, but it'll be a little spot illustration. I want a hat. I want a hat that for the prime minister, that a prime minister would wear to a fancy ball. To illustrate. Well, they'll do that, but they won't revise it or change it, and they won't draw. They'll just draw the hat. And then you could hire the person who does the Harry Potter illustrations, just to mention someone who's incredibly famous. I mean, her website is his. You could theoretically hire that person, but I'm sure it would cost a lot of money, and I'm sure they would produce the most beautiful drawings and match your feedback. But
no, absolutely. I mean, I have obviously I have a background like yourself in writing for publishers, but I've also done a couple of forays into self-publishing myself. So I did about 5 years ago, I did like an ebook, the CELTA compendium, CELTA Teaching Practice Compendium. Can't even remember the name of my own book. That's a good start. And that I did pay for an editor to look over that, and for somebody to do the cover, although I've subsequently changed the cover, actually. But that wasn't a huge outlay, I have to say, because it's quite a small book, and it was in quite a good state when it was handed over to the editor, if you like. And then I recently did what's known as a low content book, which is a productivity planner. And I paid for somebody to teach me basically how to do that. How to kind of use Canva to set it all up and get the templates to get it all sort of right on the page. And that's a paperback book, print on demand. So it's been interesting experimenting with both of those things, but I can't say that either of them have brought me riches beyond the dreams of avarice. I think I've probably about covered my costs, and that's it. But of course, there are other reasons for self-publishing. For me, a lot of that is about marketing as much as anything, and about sort of having a product that sort of establishes you as somebody that hopefully knows what they're talking about. I mean, what with the kinds of things that you publish for people, what different kinds of books do people publish, and why do they publish them? What are their reasons for doing it? And has anybody made a fortune?
So I don't think, I think there are very few people who make a fortune in education. There are very few people who make a fortune in publishing, even mainstream publishing. So educational publishing is not. I think the people in our industry, traditional or self-published, if they're making money, they probably have 30, 40, 50 titles out there, and they've been doing it for years and years and years. I mean, I can't think of too many ELT authors, even in traditional routes, that don't still have side gigs that aren't getting money from elsewhere. I think yes, but it's worth a try. You might have the next big idea, certainly, and I think the other reason, like a lot of times teachers come to me and they will say, I have been teaching English for grad students in the sciences, so international students, major, grad students in the sciences, and there is no textbook that exists just for that. Or there's one textbook, but it was printed 20 years ago and it's just totally out of date. It's too niche a market for the large publishers. But I want to publish that book, and I know that if I publish that book, the other teachers teaching English to grad students in the sciences are also going to buy this book.
Mm.
And I think that's a really great reason. I mean, you're putting out something that you want to teach with, you're going to teach with. You're obviously going to be an effective marketer because you're probably talking to those people and networking with those people. You know, and it might lead to, even if you don't make it rich on that, it might lead you to another job. Someone might say, you know, Harvard or Oxford might say, hey, we have an opening for the English language teacher. Get me the person who wrote this book.
Well, absolutely, though. I do think that often, you know, writing, self-publishing can be a kind of extended advert, if you like, you know, for what it is that you have to offer. But the situation that you've just described, I mean, actually, I think it is possible, if you've got a niche like that, that you can make quite good money out of that for you as an individual, even if it's something that a big publishing company that's going to throw hundreds of thousands at things that they publish wouldn't be interested in. And that, you know, that's one of the beauties of it. I think that we can find like these kind of seams, if you like, that, you know, are quite narrow, but actually there's plenty there for us, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes people do very well. I mean, I think probably the best known example would be Luis Otávio Barros, who has spoken about, you know, his book, The Only Academic Phrase Book You'll Ever Need. And, you know, he's selling hundreds of thousands of copies of that from what I can see, you know, so it can be done.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, as you say, if you hit the right thing.
Yeah, and I think if you really, you know, I'm thinking more and more that it really helps to have a narrow focus and really do one thing at a time. So if you put out your book, you know, if you put out your graded reader, you know, market that graded reader, you know, until the well is dry, and then put out your next graded reader, the greatest thing in that field. I think sometimes people jump around a lot and they try different things. And sometimes you have to try different things to see what works. But if you get something that works, I have an author, Alice Savage, so she does plays for English language, which again is a niche market. So it's something that the people who are using plays and using drama love them, you know, and we get some reliable, regular sales from those people. But then a lot of teachers are like, well, I don't know if I could do a play. That sounds hard. I don't know, it won't fit in the curriculum. Well, it has to be to fit in the curriculum, especially in America, for example. It has to be, they want it to be an adapted play of a literary book, so they can kind of fit it, because they have to teach, you know, classic books, so it has to be. But she writes original plays. So what we ended up doing, we put out some plays, we put out some textbooks built around plays, and they did okay. And then finally, she put out a book, the drama book, which is basically just a massive collection of drama activities and how to put on a play in class and pronunciation games and how to write plays with students. And that's what really sells. So the plays themselves, and then hopefully that will be the gateway to the plays themselves. But.
Well, exactly. I was just thinking that. Then hopefully they'll want to go and check out her plays. And of course, you can mention those within the book about drama. Presumably she has.
Right.
You know, send people off there. So I've seen we've got quite a few people that who've said hello, and I can see are watching us live. If you have any questions, now's your chance. So pop them in the comments, and Walton and I will do our best to answer them. And if you're watching later, please do feel free to add any comments if you're watching on replay as well, because we can come back and check those later. Just tag us so that we see them. So you mentioned earlier, and indeed when you were talking about the plays, you were kind of hinting at it. I have heard that one of the best ways to actually sell well with self-published books is to have a series, so that, you know, when people have read one or two, they then want to get more of them. Obviously, this kind of applies the most to things like, I don't know, like the Outlander books, or, you know, like to sort of fantasy or crime, but presumably there is something in that in terms of series of books within ELT as well, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think people I mean, there's something about our brains and branding. So Dorothy Zemek of Ways Goose Press, who's the big self-publishing guru,
Mhm.
um, and deservedly so. She does 50 ways series. So
Mm,
50 ways to teach writing, 50 ways to teach grammar, um,
mm,
and all the covers are kind of the same. They have a teacher with a chalkboard behind them, and yeah, I think it's people kind of look for that. So people will go to her and say, I want to teach drama. Oh, Dorothy Zemek has those wonderful books. Hey, do you have a 50 ways to teach with drama book? So I think
mm,
the brand recognition is quite helpful.
mm,
Getting a loyal, customer base.
mm,
Um, and then I think the other thing with ELT is leveling. So I'll very often get that where people say, "Oh, I love this book. It's brilliant." We have a book, Stories Without End, so it's unfinished stories,
mm.
and then the student finishes the story. But the author teaches at a higher. He teaches university and grad students, so the level is quite high.
Mm.
So we get people saying, "Well, do you have this, but for younger learners or for middle school students, middle grades,
Mm.
um,
Or lower language level,
lower language
presumably.
level,
Yeah.
lower maturity level, lower?"
Mm,
Because some of the book,
mm,
some of the stories are quite to make them fun and interesting and have lots of plot twists. There's violence and romance and stuff that you
mm.
can't do with younger kids.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, actually. And of course, the traditional publishers do that all the time. I mean, that's what course book series are all about, isn't it?
Yeah,
So that does make a lot of sense, I think, if you're producing something for students. And any other kind of, things that you think, have particular potential or sell particularly well. Any tips for aspiring um, self-publishers out there?
yeah. Well, I think as a self-publisher, I don't think you're going to compete with the larger publishers if you're trying to do a textbook series, because they can do the audio and the video, and Cengage has
Mm,
access to the National Geographic photos, and they can put together an author team, and pump out an entire series in a year or two, or faster. So I think to me, what I think authors kind of like, or teachers rather like, are supplementary books. And so I think it's very often kind of niche things, maybe something that you're doing in your classroom that your students really like. Maybe it's an activity type, like a Story Without End,
mm,
or I have these mystery game things that I developed, that I mainly sell them as worksheets, but those sell quite well.
mm.
Um, Maybe just an approach. Maybe you have a particular approach to teaching reading or writing or vocabulary. But I think people may disagree. But in my opinion, I think what people like is simple ideas, and it's the idea, but then it's also the application. So
Mhm.
you might say, like, here's my method for teaching vocabulary, and then here's my workbook that applies that method to all the words on the academic word list.
Mm.
But with every worksheet is 10 different words, for example.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So would you say that most of the people who publish with Alphabet Publishing are aiming it at teachers then rather than students?
Um, a little of both. A little of both. We do student books as well.
Mm.
Student books are definitely easier to. I mean, student books are nice because you hopefully sell a series of them.
Mm.
You don't just sell just the one. Um, but teacher books, I think it's easier to market to teachers because the teachers are, your direct consumer. But if you're student books, the buyer, the person with the buying decision, is probably a school administrator.
Mm.
Those are harder to find. Um,
Yeah, no,
those
I
are
think
harder
that's true. Unless, of course, they are books, I mean, like the one that I mentioned before, where the students themselves are kind of finding them on
Yeah,
Amazon. But then, you're not talking about kids for starters, so they're only going to be very specific kind of markets, probably academic student books or maybe business books, where people are going to be looking for them themselves, aren't they?
Yeah, self-study, especially maybe nowadays, self-study book. That might be the power of Luis's book, is that it's good for teachers, it's good for students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And we have a question from Michelle. So Michelle says, I think you sell on TPT to teachers pay teachers.
Yes.
Do you notice that separate resources sell better than whole books or vice versa? Oh, that's an interesting question.
That is a good question, because the great thing about that, about teachers pay teachers, and I think there are other, TES is another site like that. I think you can do the same thing. You can sell individual resources, and then you can also bundle them together, and sell, a block of all of them together. And so what I find is that, like, individual resources I'll sell more volume of those, but the bundles make me more money, because I can set the price a lot higher. And I could be wrong, but I think they help to kind of sell each other, because I think maybe someone will buy, one or two individual resources, and they'll like them. And this may happen over the course of 6 months or a year or 2 years, but eventually they'll say, I really like these resources. Why don't I just buy the whole bundle, and then I'll have them all? And I don't know about, it might be vice versa, where they might look at the whole bundle and say, oh, these are great, but not all of them. Oh, this one's not going to be appropriate for my classroom. This one's, looks too hard. Well, I'll buy this one, and this one. And then they can go to the individual pages.
So it's the flexibility, you think, that kind of works, because different people are going to want different things.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And do you, in terms of selling, well, on Amazon or on Teachers Pay Teachers, how do the potential buyers find the books? Do you spend quite a lot of time thinking about the keywords and SEO and things like that? Or, how does that work?
Yeah, so and one of the things that I love about these places is that the teachers come to the site looking for material. So half your marketing is already done for you. But yeah, I do spend some time thinking about keywords, and looking for what the customers are looking for. So one piece of advice I got is, when you're looking for if you're putting out your resource, try to search for it and see what other teachers are calling it or what it's called. And TPT is very marketed. There's a heavy K through 12 American bias. So, I might call my activity, critical thinking mystery game. But in America, in 8th grade classrooms, it might be called something. There might be a word for it. It might be called a think now, or a whodunit game. So trying to figure out what those terms are, and throughout this critical thinking activity, think now. Trying to target your audience.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But I think that goes for all marketing. Okay, one last question, because we're coming up to the hour. So Fiona said, do you do a lot of marketing for TPT? They have a lot of their own channels that I've never done anything with.
So I personally do not do a lot of outside marketing, but I think the people who are more successful in Teachers Pay Teachers, and they do it maybe full time, or they do it outside of the classroom. That's their one side hustle. I know that Pinterest is supposed to be a big pipeline into Teachers Pay Teachers. I guess I'm not a very Pinteresty person. I guess I can't get it to work for me. The one thing I do that I think does help, and I guess is a good marketing tip in general, is blog posts and social media posts where you explain how to use the resource. I think teachers often really want to know that. And if I were in the classroom, I would probably try to videotape my students using the materials. You got to be careful of copyright and faces and all that. But if you could get show, here's how I use it in my classroom. Here's a blog post about different ways to apply it. I think that really helps, because then that gets people interested.
Yeah, shows them kind of how they can envisage it. Okay, all right. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up, because we're coming up to the half hour. But I will be writing a newsletter on this topic as well, including some of the things we've talked about and some more information too. And I will put links in there to Walton Burns's company, and anything that you would like to to say to finish up with, Walton?
No, yeah, please send me any and all questions. I love to talk to people, and if there's anything I can do to help out with your publishing or self-publishing dreams, I'd love to hear your ideas and what you're thinking about.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Walton. That was really interesting. I think we probably could have gone on for quite a bit longer, actually, but we got some great value out of that. So thanks very much. And look out for the newsletter, everybody. Okay. Thanks then.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.